I might actually borrow the clicker from you, Sharon, if that's all right. Oh, that's right, I can turn it on for you. I can't believe that it's 2024. I really felt that last year it came to a close, like it just had that feeling that, okay, the year's coming to a close, it's ending, but it still feels weird that it's 2024. And yet I still feel optimistic. I'm excited for this year. I'm really excited. And so I'm going to channel my inner Ray Mwanga, and I'm going to ask you to turn to the person next to you and say, hey, I'm so glad you're here. Nice. And then turn to the other person and say, I'm so excited for 2024. Hopefully no one was lying in church this morning. Now, we're closing up on the second week of January. So that means it's been 13 days where my social media algorithm has been bullying me about not being back to the gym yet. But you know what? It hasn't been too bad because there's actually been a trend on social media that I've actually really been liking. And I'm not someone who typically jumps on any trends, but this trend has basically told me that New Year's resolutions aren't a thing. They're not a thing this year. We're not setting New Year's resolutions. Instead, we're doing in and out lists. And I really like this because basically what it's doing is you create a list of the things that you're bringing into the new year with you, and then you create a list of the things that you're throwing out, things that aren't coming with you into this new year. And I like it. And so naturally, in my attempt to stay relevant, I made a list of my own. So firstly, I thought drinking water. I'm setting the bar real low. I mean, we can't really... I feel like you can't be too disappointed if you keep your expectations low for the new year. So drinking water this year. Water is great for you. It's great for me. Out, scrolling on my phone for too long. We're not bringing that into this year. Shopping secondhand. Kind of fun, a fun thing to do with friends, and also saving money and helping the environment. Thing I want to start doing. Out, snoozing my alarm. We're not doing it this year. My internship. If you don't know, this is my awkward way of letting you know that I am starting my internship at Springwood Church this year. Thank you. Thank you. I'm really excited, and I feel so lucky to be able to, start this journey at a church that I already love. And I feel so blessed that I get this opportunity. So thank you for having me. Out. Comparison. We're not doing it this year. Bed before 10:30. This one can be a little bit hard, considering some of our SLC meetings can run till 9:30, which brings me to my next one. Out. SLC meetings. Lauren's covering his face, so I'm assuming that one's not actually out. That's okay. We love our SLC meetings. We love our board meetings. They're important. I could go on with my in and outs, but I don't think you want to go into all of them. And there's probably more that actually aren't up here. You can have a read if you like. But I really just wanted to share the why behind why I like this trend. I really like it because it's a trend that forces you to look back over the past year in reflection. And you're asking yourself, what am I leaving behind in 2023? And what am I taking with me into 2024? There's a process that we have to go through. Scrolling too fast. So there's a difference between creating this list and creating a New Year's resolution. Because when we set a resolution, we're focused on the year ahead of us. And we tell ourselves, this is the person I want to become in 2024. a person who never skips spending time in the Word, or a person who starts their day at 5 a.m. every day, or a person who never cheats on that diet or skips that gym day. And these aren't bad goals. These are great goals, and I'm a big fan of setting goals. But why does it seem so hard to stick to a New Year's resolution? And before we know it, February, March, April, May, and next thing we know, it's winter, and we're discouraged and disappointed because our New Year's resolution has been long forgotten about. Our eyes are so focused on the year ahead, focused on the person that we want to become, without looking back and reflecting on the person that we've been. That's what I like about these lists. And I'm typically someone who likes to focus on what's in front of me. And I'm usually someone who's just focus on everything that's ahead of me. Don't worry about, when you check something off the list, move on to the next thing. But what I like about these lists is that this process involves looking back to propel us forward. Looking back and assessing what's worked, what didn't. What are the good habits formed last year? What were the bad habits we're looking to leave behind? What did I learn last year that I want to remind myself of this year? Where did God move in the last year? And although that this is just a trend and it's not really that deep, the ideology of looking back to move forward isn't a new concept. It's what God has asked his people to do over and over throughout the Bible. And I was sitting here this morning during the song service, and it occurred to me that although that this series that we are starting today is called New, I'm sure that most of what I have to say is probably not a new concept or a new thought or idea. But I'm excited. I'm excited for this series. Because throughout this series, we're going to be looking at the story of Joshua. We're going to be looking at the faithfulness of God through the lens of Joshua. This morning, we're going to be reading from the 3rd and 4th chapters. So we're skipping ahead a little bit. But before we do that, I want to catch you up to where we are in the story, because it actually begins at the end of Deuteronomy. And I have some text. We're going to start. Yeah, this is it. So just to catch you up, Moses is on a mountain. He's sitting with God. And this is a conversation between him and God, and he's looking out across the land. And this is the land that God had promised generations ago, the same land that he promised Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. This is the land that Moses spent most of his life leading the Israelites to. This was the land that he had been talking to the Israelites about. This was the land that they had been dreaming about, they'd been looking forward to. And he's sitting there on this mountain. He has yet to enter into this land, and he's looking out, and this is the conversation he has. It says in verse 4, "Then the Lord said to Moses, 'This is the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, when I said, I will give it to your descendants. I have now allowed you to see it with your own eyes, but you will not enter the land.' So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, just as the Lord had said. The Lord buried him in a valley near a place in Moab, but to this day no one knows the exact place. Moses was 120 years old when he died, yet his eyesight was clear and he was as strong as ever." We're going to circle back to that in a second. The people of Israel mourned for Moses on the plains of Moab for 30 days, until the customary period of mourning was over. Now Joshua, son of Nun, was full of the spirit of wisdom, for Moses had laid his hands on him. So the people of Israel obeyed him, doing just as the Lord had commanded Moses. There has never been another prophet in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. The Lord sent him to perform all the miraculous signs and wonders in the land of Egypt against Pharaoh and all his servants and his entire land. With mighty power, Moses performed terrifying acts in the sight of all Israel." This is how the book of Deuteronomy ends. And there's a massive void in the nation of Israel after Moses' death. They lost someone significant to their community. And it's not just, it's not just like a procession of kings where like when one passes away, the next one steps up. This was a significant leader where it is written that there has never been another prophet like Moses whom the Lord knew face to face. It is written in the word, like it is written how great Moses was. Like God did so many incredible things through Moses. I also love that they just had to slide this in there in verse 7. Just even in death, how great Moses was. That Moses was 120 years old, and yet his eyesight was clear and he was as strong as ever. And everyone was mourning over Moses, this incredible, incredible leader. There was a felt emptiness created by the death of Moses. And then Joshua, someone who'd been mentored by Moses in the last few years, Joshua was the one who had to follow in his footsteps. And I think I read the book of Joshua for the first time when I was maybe 18. And when I was reading the first chapter of Joshua, you'll read about 4 times he's told, be strong and courageous, do not be afraid. I am with you. Be strong and courageous, do not be afraid. Be strong and courageous, do not be afraid. He's told this over and over again, and I used to think, wow, if it's said this many times, it must be true. He must have needed to hear it. But it didn't occur to me until much later, until I actually went back and read Deuteronomy, that I realized, of course, God is going to tell him this. He's following Moses. Like if you've ever felt the pressure of having to follow in the footsteps of someone great, Joshua was following after Moses. So of course God's going to be saying to him, be strong and courageous. God was his biggest cheerleader. God was there saying, you're doing great, sweetie. Like I couldn't imagine being Joshua having to follow someone as great as Moses, and yet he took it in stride. There's some cool things about this book, because the book of Joshua actually describes the possession of the promised land. So as a nation, they had been striving for this land. They had been searching for this land. They had been traveling for years to get to this land of milk and honey, and it was a fulfillment of God's covenant promises with Abraham. So generations ago, for generations, they had been talking about this land. And in this book, this is when it happens. This is when they finally reach it. And the land that they receive, it's a good and fertile land. It's flowing with milk and honey, but more importantly, it is the promised land. It's the fulfillment of God's promises, and it's a concrete demonstration of his covenant faithfulness. Joshua's very name means the Lord saves, or the Lord gives victory. And I think there's something so cool about Joshua stepping into this role, into this leadership position, because as he steps into it, his very existence in this role points to God. Because he was following someone so great. And I like to believe that Joshua knew that he could do the best he could, but he wasn't going to be Moses. I think he knew that. And I think a lot of the Israelites knew that. But what's so special about this book is that it actually points to their reliance on God. Because God had done so many great things through Moses that now when they look at Joshua, they think, God's going to have to do some pretty big things. And he did. They were so reliant on God, and I almost feel like that's the heart of this book. His name also means the Lord gives victory. So even his name demonstrated that his leadership was representative of God's guidance. And this is where we begin our story, in chapter 3. So if you have your Bibles with you or your phone, read along with me. But we're going to be starting in chapter 3, and we're just going to be focusing on chapter 3 and 4. But in this chapter, the Israelites are encamped on the east side of the Jordan River. They're ready to cross over into Canaan. So they had to cross this river to get to the promised land. Like this was something that they had to do. This was part of the journey. And Joshua, who had succeeded Moses as the leader, he receives instructions from God. And so the Ark of the Covenant, I don't think we have time to get into it today, but it was the Ark of the Covenant. It's this sacred container representing God's presence that had to be carried by the priests and placed on the front of the procession. So basically, they had this Ark of the Covenant, and there were so many rules. There were so many rules of what could and couldn't be done when they carried this covenant, this Ark of the Covenant. And so they had to carry and transport this across the river. So there's already an issue here. And so in verse 3, God is telling Joshua to give Joshua's giving these instructions to the people from God. He says, when you see the Levitical priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord your God, move out from your positions and follow them. So what they would do is they would send off the Ark of the Covenant, they'll send off the priests who were carrying them, and then they would follow. And so this is how the story goes. In chapter 3, they reach the river, the Jordan River. And I actually just want to paint a picture of what this river was, because I had to do some researching. So based on some modern mathematical figures, I don't know what that's called, but basically, if they had to compare the depth and the width today, and then I also converted it to meters, so let's just say this is a roundabout figure. So this river, the Jordan River, it was very different back then to what it is today. So back then, they were saying it was probably roughly about 100 feet wide, which is about, according to my Google calculator, is about 30.48 meters wide. So it's pretty decently wide. And then it was about 5 to 10 feet deep. So that's like 1.5 to 3 meters deep. And so in my head, when I hear this, I think, okay, they could have gone around. Maybe, I don't know. But what they couldn't do is they couldn't cross that. They couldn't just walk through it. And don't forget that they also had to carry this Ark of the Covenant across too, and that's definitely not something that you want to get wet. So the difference, here's the thing, there's a parallel between this situation. There is a river that they have to cross, and God sends them and says, the priest carrying the Ark of the Covenant, I want you to put your feet in the river. So they have to put their feet in the river, and when they stand there, the river opens. The river parts. And this is very similar to something that the Israelites had gone through years ago, the Red Sea. God had parted the Red Sea, but there's a difference between these two situations, is that for the Red Sea, Moses lifted the staff, and then the waters parted. And I want to point this out real quick, because the Israelites were able to see the miracle, and then they had to cross. And that was a pretty significant miracle for the time. But this time, they had to actually step into the water before the water would part. And so I just want to say that if you've seen God move before, he will move again. But it's still going to require a step of faith. In chapter 4, it says, verse 1, when all the people had crossed the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, now choose 12 men, one from each tribe. Tell them, take 12 stones from the very place where the priests are standing in the middle of the Jordan. So at this point, they're standing in the middle of the Jordan. What was meant to be about 1.5 to 3 meters deep, they're standing in the middle of the Jordan, and they have to stand there until all the Israelites pass. And he's saying, carry them out and pile them at a place where you will camp tonight. So Joshua called together the 12 men he had chosen, one from each of the tribes of Israel. He told them, go into the middle of the Jordan, in front of the ark of the Lord your God. Just remember that this was representative of God's presence in their camp. And he says, each of you must pick one stone and carry it out on your shoulder. So this isn't just a small stone. This is a stone. Carry it out on your shoulder, 12 stones in all, one for each of the 12 tribes of Israel. I just want to note that these stones had to be from the middle of the Jordan to highlight that they had crossed over on dry land. Like, it was significant that they didn't just choose some rocks on the side of the river. They had to choose some stones from the center of that river. Verse 6, he says, "We will use these stones to build a memorial. In the future, your children will ask you, 'What do these stones mean?' Then you can tell them, 'They remind us that the Jordan River stopped flowing when the Ark of the Lord's covenant went across.' These stones will stand as a memorial among the people of Israel forever." So after all the people have safely crossed, God instructs Joshua to select 12 men, one from each tribe, to take 12 stones, build a monument, and these are 12 stones from the midst of the Jordan River, where the priest's feet stood. And they were to serve as a memorial, a visual reminder of God's faithfulness and this miraculous crossing. Joshua arranges these stones into a monument at their campsite. And the purpose of this memorial is to remind future generations of God's power and faithfulness in leading them into the promised land. The crossing of the Jordan River becomes a pivotal moment in the history of the Israelites, symbolizing their transition from the wilderness to the land flowing with milk and honey. This story emphasizes the importance of trust and obedience to God's guidance in fulfilling his promises. God made a promise so long ago, generations ago, that he would lead his people to the promised land. It was a gift that he had promised them for so long. And this was the moment that they were finally going to enter the promised land. And they had to cross the river to do it. But God stops them and says, "Build a monument in remembrance of me." He says, "Stop, and I want you to remember this moment. I don't want you just to remember this moment now, but I want future generations to remember the journey we have been on together. I want future generations to remember the journey you've been on. Remember the wilderness. Remember the river. Remember Egypt. Remember the journey that we have taken." In verse 15, the Lord had said to Joshua, "Command the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant to come up out of the riverbed." So Joshua gave the command. And as soon as the priests carrying the Ark of the Lord's Covenant came out of the riverbed, and their feet were on high ground, the water of the Jordan returned and overflowed its banks as before. The people crossed the Jordan on the 10th day of the month. Then they camped at Gilgal, just east of Jericho. This is where they built the monument. It was there that Joshua piled up the 12 stones taken from the Jordan River. Then Joshua said to the Israelites, "In the future, your children will ask, 'What do these stones mean?' And then you can tell them, 'This is where the Israelites crossed the Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the river right before your eyes, and he kept it dry until you were all across, just as he did at the Red Sea when he dried it up until we had all crossed over.' He did this so all the nations of the earth might know that the Lord's hand is powerful, and so you might fear the Lord your God forever." Throughout the Old Testament, throughout the New Testament, this is a common theme. God constantly reminding the Israelites, reminding his people of the journey that they have been on. Not just the journey that they had been on, but the journey they had been on with him. So many times throughout Scripture, they're reminded of what God has done for them. He's reminded them of how he has freed them from exile, freed them from slavery, freed them from Egypt, how he has brought them through the wilderness, through the desert, through seas that should not be crossed on foot. He is constantly reminding them. And it comes up so many times in the Bible. This isn't the only time. I mean, you can read in Isaiah. You read in Isaiah where God essentially puts himself on the stand in Isaiah 43. He basically puts himself on the stand and he says, "Do you not remember what I have done? Like, you are my witnesses. I can tell you of all the things that I've done for you. I can tell you, I can give you my case. I can plead my case. But you are my witnesses. You're the ones who witnessed it. You know the stories. You've been there. You've seen the journey that we've been on. You're my witnesses." God is constantly reminding us of the journey we've been on. I think it's important to not just focus on what's ahead of us, but to look back and remind ourselves of the journey that we've come on. I mean, this last year, just think back to all the different things that you've gone through, whether it might be loss, or maybe it's financial issues, or maybe it's family struggles, or maybe it's relational problems, or maybe it's been a great year. Maybe this last year was really great and really blessed. You felt blessed as a family or blessed as an individual. I look back at my own past year and I feel, when I look for those moments where I know God has moved, it gives me confidence stepping into a new year knowing that He's going to move again. I can look back and know that God's carried me through some tough situations. So when I step into the unknown, I know He's going to carry me through the next. It's important to focus on what's in front of us and to not get stuck in the past. And this is what I meant when I said, even though the series is called New, this is not a new topic or a new theme, because we've kind of been preaching it a little bit here at Springwood, where we look back to move forward as a church. We look back to appreciate the journey that we've come through as a church. We look back to appreciate everything that God's done for us, but we continue to move forward, and we use our past to propel us forward. I'm going to ask you to do something and to engage. I'm going to ask you to pull out your phone real quick, and I'm going to give you a couple of seconds. And what I want you to do is to open up the notes section in your phone. If you don't know where that is, then send yourself a text message. But I want you to write something, or even if you don't know right now, then just write this question: what will you bring with you into 2024? As you're thinking about it, I want you to think back over this past year. Maybe it is a habitual thing. Maybe you're thinking, maybe there's some great habits I'd like to carry into this new year. Or maybe it's some words of wisdom. Or maybe it's some encouragement to carry you through. But what are you bringing with you into this new year? And then after you've done that, I want you to write, what are you leaving behind? What are you leaving behind in this new year? And as you're thinking that, I just want to give you encouragement as a church. Like, as a church, Springwood, what are we doing in this next year? What are we bringing with us into this next year? Last year was such a great highlight for us because we were able to look back on 50 years of history for our church. And it was such a pivotal moment for our church that we could look back, we could see the photos, we could see the articles. We had so many people here that we could reminisce, I don't know how to say that word, but reminisce together. We could celebrate the last 50 years. But we can't get stuck in those 50 years. We can celebrate the great times. We can mourn over the sad times. We can do that together. But as a church, what are we bringing with us into this new year, into this new season? What are we bringing with us into the next 50 years? What are we leaving behind? What are we bringing with us into our community next year or this year? And what are we leaving behind? I have so much confidence in this next year and in this next season of our church, because I've only been a part of this church for the last 2 years, and I have felt so blessed with the community that is this church, the family that is this church. But I'm excited, looking back to see the journey of our church in the last 50 years. It was such a beautiful thing to watch. And I'm excited to see what the next 50 years has in store for this church and this community and this family. And so I would just want to urge you to have that same excitement, to look forward and to use the past to propel us forward as a church. To always look back and appreciate and remember the journey that we've been on. To remember the times that God has moved for our church, moved within our church, and to use it to propel us forward into this new season, into the new promise. God had promised a land to his people, and then he had promised salvation. And now there's a promise of eternity. There are new promises offered to every single one of us. And that's an exciting thing. So yeah, I'm excited for 2024. I'm going to pray. God, I just want to pray that you go before us. Lord, I just pray that these next 50 years, you lead us to something so much more. I pray that you bring together this community, bring together our family, and I pray that we can always look to you as our leader, that you can guide us. I pray that we can always follow your lead. And God, I'm excited for your plans for Springwood. I pray that they're your plans and not our own. And I just pray that you ignite a fire within our church, ignite a passion within our church and in our community, God. We love you so much, Lord, and we're excited. We're so excited to see what you have next. So Lord, I just pray that you keep inspiring us. I pray that through remembering the journey that we've been on, that we can look forward with a new perspective, that we can look forward and get excited for what you have planned for our church. We love you, Lord, and thank you for being so, so faithful to our community, to our members, to our family. We love you, Lord. Amen.